Welcome back, everyone, to session 3 of Ministry Leadership. So once you are on track to leading yourself and trusting Christ for strength and joy in your own leadership, and then you have this clear vision that you're leading the church toward, it's important to be aware of the main things you must keep on your radar as leaders so that balls don't get dropped on the way to accomplishing that vision. Oftentimes, leaders just dive right into the minutia of day-to-day operations and people issues and finances, that they forget how important it is to see the big picture. So then once you have a handle on all those priorities, the second part of this session will be a personal management plan to get them done every week, which will be, like I said, the second half of this, and probably too much for one session, but I'll try to get in as much as I can today. One of my spiritual gifts is administration. So I have leadership, teaching, and administration. So this one is a little bit more the administration side, which made it sort of a natural fit for me to be an executive pastor and not a senior pastor, because I would always try to help my senior pastor keep all the things on the radar at once. And he would always appreciate that, and thank you, we need to keep that plate spinning, keep the ball moving in that area. So this is sort of coming out of my experience as an executive pastor of what we also need to keep on our radar screen. So the big picture is what you as the leader see at the 30,000-foot level with your radar active. You need to spend time both in the balcony and on the dance floor. The dichotomy is, and here's the quote, is leadership effectiveness depends on maintaining perspective. Focus on the big picture and still keep track of the details. So this is attention to manage. Andy Stanley talks about, is this a problem to solve or attention to manage? This one is really attention to manage, because without the details or the how you're going to do something, the big picture, the what you're going to do, is simply a fantasy. Yet if you spend too much time, too much attention to detail, it's going to go nowhere without the direction provided by the big picture thinking, like we talked about in our last session. So please beware on this. Here's a quote. Immersing yourselves in the day-to-day details can blind you to the fact that you're not going anywhere. I sort of love that exercise machine there, sort of like a hamster on a hamster ball on that, where we can have a lot of activity going on, but busyness, of course, does not mean productivity. So we're burning calories, but we're not actually getting anywhere. So motion and busyness do not mean progress toward the vision. So it's sort of like a paraphrase of my life verse. My life verse is Matthew 6:33, and in the Message paraphrase, I like how Eugene Peterson puts it. He said, when we pursue first things first, the second things are thrown in. When we pursue second things first, we not only miss out on the first things, but we also miss the fullness of the second things. Like, wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. Makes me love my life verse even more. Okay, so here are what I believe are the first things for a church leadership team once you know that the vision has to be cast and carried out. Here's the first one, and they're in no particular order. The first one is to orchestrate leadership development. This is growing your people and nurturing them. So we must equip the saints, Ephesians 4 says, equip the saints for the work of the ministry. We can't be a clergy-run church, and I've been in two types of churches, and I really resist the kind where it's like, oh, we have the pastors up there, and then there's all of us down here. You know, instead of enlisting all of the members as ministers. Some are paid, some are not paid, but we're all ministers together. So I believe the two main jobs of a growth-oriented and nurturing leader is to increase, in your notes, the achievement of the goals toward the mission of everyone on the team, and to increase the satisfaction and joy of everyone in the process. Just talking to my friend here at lunch, we were talking about how there's this direction and vision we want to get to, but let's not forsake the how we're doing it, the process of getting there. Hebrews 10:24 talks about how we need to provoke one another to love and good works. I had a pastor once call that word like agitate. Like not in a bad way, like I'm agitated, but like more of a washing machine, where it just sort of stirs up the water so things can get clean. And so we need to be agitators, sort of like poking in a healthy way, so that we all become more loving and do more good for the kingdom. So if you hold the value that your people, you see the quote there, if you hold the value that your people are your biggest asset, could someone deduce that by watching you for a week? I've asked this question of a lot of leaders, and they're like, gulp. They go, wow, I haven't really spent much time on leadership development in a long time. I'm just sort of hoping that that's happening, with on-the-job training and such, but I don't really have that in my calendar. So I would encourage you that since your calendar speaks volumes, what percentage of your time is spent on leadership development, and up that. As a result of just this seminar today, decide to make that, give that more time in your calendar. When a leader works through an organization, he can produce quality only by developing the people he leads. And John Maxwell says, one is too small a number to achieve greatness. So sort of we're like a general in battle. We need to be fighting alongside our people in the spiritual warfare that we're in, alongside of them to understand what they're going through and what their needs are in development. Ralph Nader said, the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. So in other words, we're trying to create a leadership pipeline, and it's multiplication, not addition. John Maxwell talks about if you develop a follower, that's addition, you add one. But if you develop a leader, now you've developed what one of my last bosses said is like another little mini mountain. So under them now will be all of the ecosystem underneath it. So it's multiplication, it's not addition. That's why leadership development is super important. An important part of this development process includes helping the staff and the lay ministry leaders set and achieve meaningful goals for personal change. So you're hearing me say values and goals a lot today. It's just because I'm just so knowing that those two things, you have to have your course set, and then you have to know where you're going. So you'll hear that a lot from me today. A couple of things when it comes under this is coaching and mentoring your inner circle. So I think one of the best things a leader can do is have one-to-ones with his or her direct reports. And so these can be monthly, like for an hour. They can be weekly for 30 minutes. It's really up to you. And I would love to give you a sample of a one-to-one flow, like an agenda. I would just have these printed in my desk, and I would pull them out as that employee walked into my office, and we do a coaching session. And we would talk through their wins and find out what their struggles were and pray together. And I just really look forward to that. Most of my employees look forward to it too. One of them called them therapy sessions, with the executive pastor, which was just sort of funny. But they really got into that, that one-to-one. Also under this one is training your replacement to make sure you're too deep in every area in your church. Make sure that someone else knows what you do so that if the Lord took you home, somebody else is going to be able to pick up the ball and run with that. So have a succession plan. You're like, well, we're just starting our church right now, Paul. Yeah, but even as soon as you can, get a succession plan set up so that you're really working your way out of a job and the leadership pipeline can continue. So it's not a personality-based church, it's a process-based church. And you might want to come up with duty handbooks, in other words, where everybody writes the main facets of their job and gets it, into a Word document. So in case, again, something happens, someone could pull that document up and know exactly what you do. Finally, under this point is find out the ministry leader needs and bury your bust to get them met. I say this especially if you're a new manager, a new leader, is in those first 90 days, find out one thing that each of your direct reports are stuck in and remove that barrier. They'll follow you forever because that thing has been bogging them down for so long. And here you come in, you get a new team, you listen, you find out where they're stuck, and you do something about it. They're going to love you. So that's one of the best things that you can do if you take on a new team is remove the barriers. The formula is performance plus potential minus interference equals success. So your performance and then all this unbridled potential, if you can take out the interference that's affecting people in their ministry role, then again, they're going to get to success. Number two, thing to keep on your radar screen, first thing, is to assure that making disciples is foundational to everything. Again, I know this is a duh, that's why I'm in this, right? I'm called to the Lord to make disciples. We all know the Great Commission. But it's amazing how the centrality of God's Word and prayer can get pushed to the back burner by pastoral teams because they start leaning on their own understanding, Proverbs 3:5, instead of, again, tapping into the ultimate power source of the Holy Spirit. The more comprehensive a biblical church emphasis or a spiritual theme for the year, the more the people are going to get it. Again, it's that vision carrying kind of thing. So if children's and youth and small groups and your preaching series and the tools you give to your people and your communications all have a united plan, probably orchestrated by someone who's got the gift of administration, then there's a great chance that that vision is going to really have feet and carry out towards kingdom work. I've been at churches that have had a thematic goal, which is another Patrick Lencioni-ism, where this is the burner we're going to light hotter for just this year. We're not going to get rid of the other stuff that we're doing, but this year we really need to work on this. So in one church it was establishing a deeper relationship with Jesus, and that was the focus of the whole year. Another one was grab a hand, grow together. It was all about mentoring and baton passing and making sure that we walk a journey together with someone. We take someone with whenever we do something. So that's an example of a thematic goal that we're just lighting the burner hotter in this one area. This biblical saturation includes mentions in staff meetings and in your emails and in your newsletter articles and also with your decision filters during your elder or deacon meetings. Whenever there's a tough situation without a clear solution from man's perspective, stop and pray. Whenever there isn't consensus in your group, stop and pray. Whenever there is a conflict or a staff issue, stop and pray. You can do 40 days of prayer initiatives, prayer walks, have prayer partners, have a prayer room designated if you have a building, light up a prayer chain to make sure those prayer requests spread their way through the organization. Just keep it as one of these first things. It is simply too easy to get that endorphin rush from crossing things off a to-do list and realize you haven't made the life-on-life contact with people in your church. I know I went weeks sometimes, well, not weeks in a row, but I had full weeks where I didn't make any contacts with a person in the church. I was just too busy checking off tasks. So don't let that happen to you. Number 3 is to stay current and relevant. Stay current and relevant in ministry. Here's the quote: "A good leader is a curious leader." So I know we've already touched on this, but in our church, well, maybe I didn't say this already. In our last church, we had we reformatted our job descriptions, and we had 4, we call them pillar responsibilities for our job. Like, irrespective of the personality that was in there, what does this position need to do to get us to our mission and vision for our church? So whether that was a custodian, executive pastor, the senior pastor, whoever it was, there were 4 pillar responsibilities to get us there. One of those 4 for everybody, whether it was a custodian or the senior pastor, was professional and personal development. We felt it was that important to be there. So this is done through prioritizing your reading, surfing the internet for ideas, attending seminars, visiting other churches. I really love that. That was so much fun. We would take a field trip once a year as part of one of our retreats, and we'd go visit another church, someone who was a little further down the road than us, and pick their brain. It was so much fun. Conversing with mentors and colleagues even outside the church. And here's some things to stay current on besides that. Stay current with how to use the latest technology for the kingdom. Okay, probably a lot of you are technology savvy, and we have to leverage that. Technology can be a bad thing, and it can be a good thing. And so we need to leverage it for the kingdom. Another thing is be current with the best practices of growing churches. Now, again, we don't copy it because it's not one size fits all. So we just sort of iterate on another good idea, and we modify it for our setting. Stay current and relevant with the best leadership training for your team. On the screen there, I've got the Global Leadership Summit logo. This happens in August every year. There's probably a host site somewhere near you where just hundreds of thousands of leaders are watching some of the best leaders, both in the secular world and in the church world, for 2 full days drawn together by Willow Creek Community Church in Chicago. So look up the GLS, and that could be something I know I look forward to every year for my professional development. Be current also with an accurate pulse on your church culture. So the way to do that is through what I said last time, which was listening posts, listening to what's going on in your church, trying to find out what the true needs of the congregation are. And finally, stay current and relevant with what's going on in every area of your church. That's that MBWA, managing by wandering around, but also not being a micromanager. So you're being more of a listener, you're staying curious, and so you really have a touch point on all the different areas of the church so you don't get out of touch. Okay, number 4. Number 4 is to prepare for emergencies and crises and assure compliance. Now, some of you are probably already checking out like, okay, this one is super boring, you know, or this is the last thing on my to-do list, and I can't wait to hire an executive pastor someday who's just going to take care of all that so I don't have to. I get that. It is really not people's like, wow, thing to do. And usually, it's not a matter of if you're going to have an emergency or crisis, it's a matter of when. So usually it doesn't become important until something bad really happens, and it's like, do we have a policy on this, or what's our procedure? And then you're in big trouble because you don't know how to handle it. Sometimes even the media gets a hold of that, and it just looks like egg on face, like you weren't prepared. So you got to know this stuff, and you got to prioritize it. If you cannot tell each other right now at your table how do you handle each major emergency, then you won't be able to do it in an emergency. So if that just made you go, wow, I don't really know what our procedure is on that, then it's probably a good idea to get some policies together. So set some procedures, set some policies, and get them into an employee handbook and a policy binder. I know we said no to binders. This is something that can be in a binder because you will need to pull it out just once in a while. But have that ready for all of your potential disasters. I mean, you've got to have something in there from fires to computer backups, from boundaries to background checks for your volunteers, from transportation policies to key distribution, from CPR certification to vacations and sick leave. I mean, this could be a whole other seminar just on this, but I just wanted to give you some examples of things that you have to have a policy on just in case. Here's the quote. It is a wise person who adapts themselves to all contingencies. It's a fool who always struggles like a swimmer against the current. So be proactive in this area, not reactive, because I don't know about you, but being reactive is just exhausting. Number 5, maintain an outward focus. Maintain an outward focus. So the church is called, as we know, to go out into all the world and preach the gospel. But the pull is to stay in-house and sort of like this is our own little kingdom here. The church building becomes our oasis, and this is where only ministry happens. I know you don't believe that, or you wouldn't have got into this. We all know the church is people. It's not a building. And some of you don't even have a building right now, so you totally get this. But the pull will still be to stay in-house, even when you do get a building. It takes bold leadership to declare a vision to reach the world out there for Christ. Gone are the days where people just sort of show up and like, yay, they're here, let's minister to them. People don't do that anymore in our culture. So we're going to have to go to them locally, nationally, and internationally to minister to them. So as a leader, you're also called to form strategic alliances both within and outside your organization. So look for ways to partner with other churches and local outreaches, because your church can't do everything, and you can't serve everyone, nor can you specialize in everything. So I would encourage you to refer and partner with others. Get the church involved in serving its community. So meeting real needs. So I've been a part of churches that have done ShareFest, which is where like 42 churches in an area get together and they have like a day of service where it's for very highly coordinated, and the church, even all across all denominations, come in and they do good work in the community, making a big splash, and this is the church united working together. Sometimes it gets media attention, and it just shows that we're not a bunch of infighting denominations, but actually we work together to accomplish great things for our community, keeping us relevant. This past year did Convoy of Hope, where the big truck comes in with all these supplies, and the churches get together with volunteers and serve those less fortunate by giving haircuts and and job interviews and all shoes and clothes and food. And that was just very exciting to work together across denominational lines. This takes a little investigation. It takes a little bit of relationship building to both business and nonprofit leaders in order to know what's going on in the community, in order to contribute to it in some way. So you have to network a little bit more probably than you're doing now, unless you're a total flaming extrovert and you just love being out there with people. And then some of you are out there and you're smiling right now because that's you, and everybody's pointing at that person around the table right now. But for the rest of us, especially the introverts among us, it's a little bit of uncomfortable to go out and network in the community when your whole world has sort of been the church. So everything is an opportunity. See that on the screen. Every person, every piece of mail you get, don't just chuck it in the trash. Say, is there value in this? You know, so this is a ribbon cutting for a business. Maybe I could show up at that. Maybe I'll meet some people. It's free. Not going to come out of your church budget. See if you can go up and show up at that. Every event is a possible ministry opportunity. And I would encourage you also, pastors, to require your team that's sitting around you to be out in the community, or else it's probably not going to happen. It's got to be mandatory to do that. Making connections on the community boards sometimes. The Chamber of Commerce meetings. I used to go, I was the only church represented at the Chamber of Commerce when I was on staff at a church. Now I work for one. But it was just amazing to see I was the only church, and people would go, why are you here? You know, you're not a business, you're not here to make money. And I was saying, well, we want to be relevant to our community. We want to give back. We want to raise the water level of leadership in our community, and we think the church is one of the assets to do that. And they'd be like, huh. So it was a conversation starter for me when I would go to chamber meetings. Let's see. Contribute articles to the local newspaper. You probably have a local business journal. And also find places to speak in order to be relevant to your community. There are a lot of service groups like Kiwanis and Lions and Rotary that have to get a speaker every single week. And what if you were in that rotation once a year and you spoke on something like leadership or getting involved with nonprofits or where to put your volunteer time? You come across as the expert, they start looking to the church for that kind of relevance. And finally, in this one is in benevolence. You probably have people that are starting to come to you with needs. Maybe some are inside the church, some are outside the church. They need a utility bill or a rent bill paid. Be sure you have some policies, and I would encourage you to do that in a non-toxic charity way. There's a book called Toxic Charity by, I think it's Robert Lupton. And so this book has really swept across a lot of churches and nonprofits in the last year, and it's where we need to give a hand up to those who are coming to us less fortunate and not a hand out, where we just throw a check at them or money or food and then off they go. No, instead we build a relationship with them, and through that relationship we get to know them and we try to get them reconciled to their Heavenly Father and to others. And maybe we help them a little bit with their budget too, so that they can get out of this cycle of poverty that they are in. So have some really good, healthy benevolence policies. Number 6. Number 6 is to shepherd the process of staff, including volunteer staff, community building. Now we'll get more into this in our next session, so I'll just touch it here. As the leadership team goes, so goes the church. So here's the quote. Any leader has one priority: the quality of people under his command. Without their skill and spirit, the best plans and policies turn to dust. So we have to make this a priority of, again, building this team. Creating a climate of collaboration, because what I found is people help support what they help create. And this goes back to the vision and that listening thing. Everyone's voice must be heard and validated. So team build every month together. I'd encourage you to go on a team retreat twice a year, where it's just you carve out a day or two together. Maybe you play and pray on one of those retreats, and maybe you strategically plan on another one of those retreats. But basically, you're trying to build community with each other. Treat your employees like family. Here's a quote by John Townsend of Cloud and Townsend fame. When a leader actually cares about the lives, feelings, and interests of people, something energetic and creative gets generated inside them, and they will tend to give more of themselves to that task. So we have to calendar time to get to know people, and also, I know we want to be private sometimes, but we got to let those that we work with get to know us. because your people are not going to open up to a mysterious stranger, right? So we have to make sure we have that, that vulnerability that we talked about in the first session. So morale boost, affirm around every corner, share kudos freely. George Lorimer says, praise judiciously bestowed is money invested. I like that. And Bob Basso said, if it's not fun, you're not doing it right. So we have to facilitate some fun in ministry, have play days together, you know, yuck it up with humor and celebration. Like, I love when I come into a church team and I see them with positive banter with one another, teasing each other. You know, not critical banter, but positive banter. It just shows that they've got some rapport built up here. There's some team stuff going. In my last church, we had something called Abbey Time, where this is our time for devotions with the staff, and we would go to the chapel together, and it was very unstructured. Somebody could bring a guitar one week. Somebody else could say, let's just pray for our families this week. Sometimes we just prayed over one person who was going through a struggle. We called it Abbey Time, and it was just a fun, unstructured way to build community together. Graham Alexander says this, sustained high performance comes when you're satisfied and enjoying life. So again, we can't control that, but we can create the atmosphere around it. And number 7 is to ask the tough questions and challenge the process. It's evaluating according to your purpose, your mission, and your vision. Nothing improves without evaluation. Maxwell even says, you know, experience isn't the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. And I think Andy Stanley said this other quote, if it's worth doing, it's worth evaluating. So how are you doing in this area of when you have a big event, an attractional event, or the Christmas season just went through? Have you taken some time in a staff meeting where you just evaluate how it went? How was the process? And what was the outcome? What were the wins for the kingdom? What can we put in the file to do better for next year? So build those evaluation of recent events into every staff meeting. You can even make a series of questions that ask about how that process and the relationships. Sometimes leaders don't want to know negative feedback. I don't know about you, I often like just to hear the good news, right? And nobody wants to hear that negative feedback. And research shows that the higher you go, so if you're the highest in your organization, like the senior pastor, the less negative feedback you get as often, because you get insulated from it. The people below you are taking a lot of those, they're being your shield, they're your armor bearer, and they're taking the hits, and sometimes you lose track of reality. Or maybe you get comfortable with success, and you like the status quo, and so you don't want to hear the negative feedback. But just all that does is it leads to complacency. Don't ever be satisfied with any facet of your ministry. There's always a way to sharpen it. The best graphic I got, I should have brought a copy of it for you and put it on the screen, but if you can picture sort of a bell curve, and this is called the life and death cycle. And so at the beginning of the life and death cycle, on the life side, something is birth. You're doing a church plant, or you get married, or you start employment in a business. Everything's really awesome there. You buy a new house, and boy, there's just all this idealism and excitement in the air. It's so much fun because it's just full steam ahead, blue sky. Then you start growing. So the next step is growth. And when you get to the growth stage, it's like now things are starting to hum. We're getting some wins under our belt. There's some cool stories that we can tell. We're still taking lots of risks, and we shrug if something fails because we're just taking some experiments. Then we keep going up higher, and we get to something called maturity. I don't really like that word, but in the diagram it says maturity. And maturity is where like things are really humming. You're making your budget. More people are coming to the church. Your relationships are getting stronger, and you feel pretty good. And here's the dangerous part. You head over to the death cycle of the curve if you start getting complacent. And that complacency right there, thank you, Brian, and the complacency side of the right side of that screen, the death cycle, is where it's really scary. After a while, you just go, you know what, I sort of like it here. Status quo is sort of fun, attendance is good, our budget is right on track, nobody's like in any trouble, you know, we got some policies in the book. I think we're just going to sort of stay here. And so instead of being a pioneer, you start becoming a settler. You know, pioneers sort of get the arrows in the back. Settlers are like, okay, let's build a homestead here. I got my land. Let's put some fire in the fireplace and hang out. Well, what happens is, unbeknownst to you, you're on the death cycle, and you start heading down the right side of the curve. Then you get to a place called decline. Now people start getting their feathers ruffled, and people start turning on each other, and you have to have the forms filled out, and there has to be a sure thing that happens, and nobody takes risks anymore because, ooh, we've tried that before and it doesn't work. And we start hearing lots of negativity. People start leaving the church, and conflicts start happening, and if we're not careful, we end up at the bottom of that curve on the right side, and that is death. And that's when churches shut their doors, or a divorce happens in a relationship, or someone goes bankrupt in their business because they didn't, at the top of the curve, at the crest up there, instead of getting complacent, they need to start a new S-curve from right there, and always keep making new S-curves so we don't go down the other side. Keep challenging that process. So don't ever be satisfied. We serve a God of excellence, and we're most like Him when we're pursuing excellence. So here's a question to ask, or here's a series of questions to ask when you're challenging the process. Ask yourself, so what's missing here? What are we missing? Or why are we doing that way? Now, usually new people can get away with that question. So if you're new on your team, ask that all the time, because what it's going to do, it's going to force the people that have been there longer to explain why they do it. And usually it's a good reason, but sometimes it's like, we just always done it that way, and maybe there's a better way. How can that be improved is a great question. Who's the weak link on the team, and how can we assist him or her? Okay, probably not going to ask that in front of everybody, but senior pastors or senior leaders or elders, you may want to ask that question once in a while, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you need to make sure everybody is pulling together, and you may have to confront someone. Let's do number 8, and then we'll head into some time management tips. This one probably should be number 1, but constantly ask if God is being glorified in all the church does. So watch out that you don't get the rebuke that Peter did in Matthew 16:23. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Peter was just speaking out of, the flesh to Jesus, and Jesus scolded him and says, "You're not thinking right, Peter. You're not having the mind of me, of Christ right now." And we can be careful, and we have to be aware that we don't also have that kind of mindset. To effectively lead people, we must humbly follow God. That's the pattern of all these principles today. And I really love the verse that says, "So we make it our goal to please Him." Wow, wouldn't that be a great personal vision statement? Because we'll never completely get there, but we can always be on the road to that, pleasing Him along the way. And I just love that verse. All right, so we're going to go into a little section. So now we know what the big picture vision is. Now we know what these other things to keep on our radar. I hope you're not overwhelmed with all those things, but there are a lot of things to keep on your radar, and that's why you're in a team setting. Let's talk a little bit about time management right now, because time management is the way we can actually get the stuff done on our plate. And this is my favorite topic to talk about. I'm probably niching on it. If you go to my website, you probably see that this is one of the things I love to talk about the most. And I'm sort of OCD, obsessive compulsive, when it comes to time management. So it makes me excited to be able to share a little bit of this today. Like, I have my Microsoft Outlook calendar color coded. Okay, and I've broken it down to the 15-minute increment. I've got all of my tasks made into appointments with myself, so it looks like I'm completely booked for the day. And I know I can be over the top when someone comes into my office and I just keep typing. I don't swivel my chair to say hello to them. I know, shame on me, right, on that, because then I would be off track, which would be horrible. That's the administration and me gone bad in that. But time is a limited quality, and as you know, activity doesn't necessarily mean productivity. So sometimes the only reason we're not getting our vision done and these big picture things that I was talking about a few minutes ago is because we're poor time managers. And I want to give you some surefire, tried and true tips to be a better time manager, because it's really going to help you in ministry to stay on track. So let me give you 8 things quickly in this session to be intentional and effective as a personal ministry manager. The first one, we've already hit, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but that's to determine your most important priorities overall. One book calls them their HLA, so your high leverage activities, that if you give lots of time to these things, the needle moves a lot faster than if you give time to these other things. So let's figure out what those are first. They're often determined by your values, there's the word again, and your church's values. And sometimes, if you're not the boss in your church, your boss's values. It's really good to pick their brain and hear their heart so you know how you can come alongside them. The big thought for this whole time management is that you manage your time around your values and your vision. Two things we've talked about today. And if you live in congruence, boy, you're going to enjoy ministry and you're going to be in it for the long haul. If you live in that dissonance thing, you're going to burn out quicker. It's going to drain the life out of you. And your life expectancy in ministry is probably not going to be too long. And I would hate for that to happen. So you first determine what your values are, what's most important. Then you need to know where you want to go. That's the vision, which we've talked about. And then what is your part in getting that vision accomplished? John Maxwell says you can't have a peak performance without a peak purpose. And so I also know that you have to change your belief before you change your behavior. Some people say, well, I believe that, I'm just not doing it. I go, huh, really? Do you really believe it if you're not doing it? It doesn't seem like you've even convinced yourself that that's the truth, or you probably would be doing it. But at that time of belief, like with time management, for instance, if you really believe what I'm saying is true today, these strategies will actually work, and you will be so much more productive than you were a year ago. For instance, if I told you that for every minute you spend in planning and organizing, you save 10 minutes. If you believe that in your heart and you apply that principle, it's actually going to work for you, and it will revolutionize your productivity in ministry. If you don't believe it, you know, it's just another quote out there. So it takes conscious planning to create chunks of time that you can actually devote to your priorities. Okay, let's go on to number 2. That one's very philosophical, and there's a lot of activities we could do together on that one, but let me get to some real practical tips. Number 2 is before you leave each day, okay, so before you call it quits for the day, look ahead at your schedule for tomorrow and make sure you know your top 3 priorities for tomorrow. Okay, so before you leave today, before you drive home to your family, you are going to make sure you know your top 3 priorities for tomorrow. Why 3? Why not 5 or 7 or 10? Well, most people will agree with me that 3 things is achievable in a day. And you'll feel pretty good if you can get 3 things done. Now, more than 3 priorities, and you probably don't have any priorities, because then everything's a priority. And the word priority means top. So, in fact, I heard it was just in the last 20 years that the word priority became plural, priorities, because it's sort of an oxymoron, like 3 tops. You know, you can't have 3 tops. But for our Western society, it's become plural, and so we can have 3 top priorities in our day. Everything is not a priority. Not every task is equally important. So you ask yourself, if I could only get 3 things done tomorrow, what would they be? And or I would be frustrated and annoyed if I didn't get these 3 things done, is another way of saying that. I color code those. Again, I'm a little OCD. I color code those in my program. Some of you might be paper planners. Some of you might use Google Calendar. Whatever you're using right now, I color code those so they jump out at me as I look at my calendar. I often color them red. It's like, woo, these are the hot items for tomorrow. Some people go old-fashioned. They put them on 3x5 cards. They tuck it in their pocket or their wallet, or they plug them into their phone if they're techie. So every time they open their phone, they see their 3 priorities for the day. Just depends what works for you. The key is that you just look at it throughout the day. If you find that card like 5 days later, like, oh, these are my 3 priorities for last Tuesday, that doesn't really help you. So you need to make sure it's something that's right in front of you. Why is this so important to scope out tomorrow? Well, I believe a couple things. That there is peace of mind going home, knowing the plan for tomorrow when coming to church the next day. So a lot of pastors have trouble transitioning from work life, church life, ministry life, to home life. And their spouses squawk. And they're like, hey, you're still talking about church, you're still talking about conflict. I was so guilty of this so many times. I used my spouse as a dumping ground. You know, I back up the dump truck, you know, and dump all my stress on her. She didn't need to have that. Please don't do that. I know we need our confidant with us in ministry, but we have to shield them from some of that stuff. So a better way would be to have a hard stop in your day. And one of those hard stops is planning tomorrow. Also, if you, your subconscious starts working on those problems for tomorrow as you sleep. There's research that proves this. So if you plan your day first thing in the morning, you're actually losing the effect of your subconscious working on those issues while you sleep. And everybody says, too, if you have these 3 priorities set, when you hit the ground at church in the morning, you're not going to waste as much time figuring out what am I going to do? Look at all these piles on my desk. You'll be like, all right, I know it's these 3 things. Off I go. So you might even want to have that stand-up meeting like I mentioned earlier where everybody gets together and everybody shares what their 3 top priorities are for the day, and you pray together, and boom, you keep rowing. Off you go. Say your mission or your vision or your tagline, whatever it is, everybody go back and be productive and help each other get to those top 3 priorities. Number 3, get your priorities done near the beginning of your day. This is typically the most creative time of the day for people. Research shows between 10 and 12 is the most productive time for most people. Here's the quote: afternoons become runaway trains. Afternoons become runaway trains. So for instance, if you're a procrastinator, and we're all procrastinators at some level, right? And you take in your computer program and you drag your top 3 priorities into the afternoon, what inevitably happens? A parishioner walks in and says, I've got this problem, my wife is leaving me, and boom, you're into a counseling situation. Or your own child calls you from school and says, Dad, I'm sick. I need you to come pick me up. Something inevitably happens in the afternoon when you've procrastinated, and now there is no more time to get your priorities done, and you drag it to tomorrow. And if you do too much of that, it just sort of builds up like layers of gunk, and you feel like you're a failure. You're not getting those priorities done. So we all are procrastinators. Another book I can recommend is called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. And so you don't have to buy the book, but here's the concept. So if you have to eat a live frog today, which is disgusting, okay, it would be better for you to eat the frog first thing in the morning than to think about eating the frog for the whole day, right? That's why I go to the dentist at the 7 o'clock time slot, because I don't want to think about the dentist for the rest of the day. So eating the frog means you're going to tackle your number 1 priority as early in the day as possible. And if you are a procrastinator, and you can smile at each other if you know you are, if you're a procrastinator, I would encourage you just to get a chunk of the project done. You can even put on your calendar, start performance appraisal, or start plans for fundraiser, or, plan out sermon calendar for 2016. Just put start. And so you're going to carve out, an hour, hour and a half on that task, and you're just going to get going on it. Then, when an hour and a half is up, you're going to move on to priority number 2. What the cool thing about this is when you calendar the next step, which will be finish 2016 sermon planning, you already have half of it done. And you're not going to procrastinate because it's not the white screen of death, with the cursor blinking at you. And you're just like, oh, I don't want to do this. You're going to actually come back to it and go, hey, it's halfway done. I'm just going to jump in this, and I'm going to bang it out and finish it. So that's my best tip I can give you on avoiding procrastination. Get it done as early as you can. Just start it, and as far away from the deadline as possible. That first hour of the day and that last hour of the day are sacred. So the last hour, remember, is when you're doing that preview for tomorrow. The first hour is when you tackle that number 1 priority. Number 4. Number 4 is to make appointments with yourself. So this could be the best time management tip that I could give you if you haven't gotten your tip already. This is, you're going to take every task that's on your to-do list. Maybe you use a legal pad. Maybe you're writing in a legal pad right now, and throughout the day you've already been putting things that become to-do lists when you get back to church, okay? I hate legal pads. Well, I don't hate them. I just mean that you can use them to capture your thoughts, but I look at that legal pad and go, don't want to do that, don't want to do that, don't want to do that, and it becomes a procrastination tool. Only when I shifted from legal pad to putting those items into my calendar as if it were a meeting with a person that I became more productive. I'm serious about that. So if it says write performance appraisal, I actually find a place in my calendar this week from 9 to 10 on Tuesday, and I put in start performance appraisal for Joe. Okay, and then now it's in there. So now when it comes 9 o'clock on Tuesday, the little reminder goes bing, right? Start performance appraisal for Joe, and I obey my calendar. That's the key. Obey your calendar, and I start working on the performance appraisal. Otherwise, you keep hitting dismiss or snooze, and you get this whole chain of all these dismissal things, and you feel like a loser. So it's really important to make sure that you obey your calendar if you do this step. Evaluate as accurately as possible how long it will take you to do the task. Here's a little tip: is overestimate how much time it's going to take. because here's the trick. Then you gamify it. You try to get it done faster than you've put on your calendar, and if you do, you've just found time. Okay, not really. But what you've done is it's already been allocated. Now I've got an extra 15 minutes to check some more emails or to chit-chat with a team member in the hallway or make a care call or whatever's going to be those little filler tasks that you have done, because it's like you've just found time. Or otherwise you would just ignore those little post-its on your desk. Number 5, got to go fast here, is go with your biorhythms. In other words, are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Are you like me? I'm actually an afternoon person. This is a great time of day for me. You're like, okay, Paul, too much. But I actually love the afternoon. Give me a good 1 o'clock meeting, and I'm like ready to rock it. How many of you are never people? You're never on your game? Okay, just point at each other on this one. All right. Well, anyways, there's a time of day where you're actually at your best, right? You know it. God wired you that way, and you've always been that way. Put your most productive tasks in that window of time. Now, maybe the night owl people, you can't get a lot done then because it doesn't really work with church schedule, you know. So sorry about that. You're going to have to conform a little bit. But for the most part, you know the best time that you're going to get those tasks done. And when you do it in your sweetest spot, it's like you actually double your output. When you try to get those great tasks done in your deadest spot physically, it's like it takes twice as much effort to get it done. Also, don't have meetings more than 90 minutes long. If you do, schedule a stretch break, because your body, your ultradian rhythm just starts tuckering out, and you reach that point of no return. Also have a hard stop in your day on this one too. The point where you just reach diminishing returns, and it's like, all right, this is going to take twice as long if I stay here. I'm going home to my family. I am done. Say it to yourself. I am done. The day is over, and go home. Number 6 is to do one thing at a time. I know this is a duh, but this is for you out there that have ADD, that have sort of that squirrel mentality. You know, and there's whatever comes at you, you just deal with it and you're reactive. Or you say, I'm a great multitasker, Paul. Actually, no. Only 2% of the population is a great multitasker. Now, you could be one of those 2%, but odds are probably not. The definition of multitasking is screwing up 2 things at the same time. So you don't want to be that, right? So try to finish that task. Close all those tabs that are across your screen by getting that task done, and move on then to the next thing and do a great job on it. Number 7 is delegate what only you cannot do. So I'm going to encourage you to not do everything yourself. You've been hired for a certain reason. Delegate. Try to enlist other people in ministry to get that done. Your inner circle is so important in ministry. Number 8 is to deal with the interrupters. And this is email, paperwork, and people. Okay, email, paperwork, and people are most people's 3 top interrupters. Now, I know interruptions are our work at some level, and we can't see people as a distraction or a disturbance. But sometimes they're impacting our ability to get kingdom work done. So I'm going to send you that with the speaker notes to give you some tips on those 3 interrupters and how to make sure you don't let them dominate and take over your day. Here's the point. The hardest person to lead in your organization is yourself. It's yourself. And you're not bringing your best self to work, and if you're not organized for the best outcomes to get those first things first done, then your results are only going to be marginal. So you can do it. Just try one of these strategies. I know it's going to make you more productive. We all have 1,440 minutes in the day, so allocate them well. So take some time of reflection with your team. Talk about these first things and maybe what needs more attention, and also talk about some time management principles that you're like, all right, I got to do that. We'll see you for the last session in a few minutes.